The UFC returns to the Pacific Northwest this upcoming weekend for the second straight year in Seattle, Washington at the Climate Pledge Arena. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is the best fight night card from top to bottom so far in 2026, and I don't even think it's close. Because in the main event, we will see the former two-time middleweight champion Israel Adesanya taking on Joe Pyfer, number 4 versus number 14 in the middleweight division, a pivotal clash in both of the states of their careers. Not to mention, there are 4 other ranked matchups on this card, and the unranked matchups are very, very good, intriguing bouts that could deliver some banger potential. And there's even a potential women's flyweight title eliminator in the co-main event. There's a little bit of everything on this fight night card, but none of them are bigger than that main event, and we're going to jump right into it right now. Adesanya v. Pyfer. It feels so weird to say that one of the greatest fighters of all time and the second greatest middleweight of all time, Israel Adesanya, enters this main event at UFC Seattle, having lost 3 straight fights and 4 of his last 5, and it gets even harder to say that 3 of those 4 losses have come by way of stoppage, including his last 2 in a row. His loss to Nassourdine Imavov, his most recent bout, came last February in the main event of UFC Saudi Arabia, where he would be knocked out in the second round, and prior to that was a title fight against Dricus du Plessis, where Adesanya looked incredible in the first 3 rounds, but then would be submitted by DDP in the 4th for his title defense. And so the last time that Adesanya has won a fight, we have to go all the way back nearly 3 years ago to April 8th of 2023, when he would get in a revenge victory over Alex Pereira at UFC 287, knocking him out in the second round after being knocked out by Pereira in the 5th and final round of their clash at UFC 281 in November of 22. But you heard the names that I just mentioned there. It's not like he's fighting bums. He's losing to Imavov, the number 1 contender in this weight class, even though he didn't get the title shot next against Hamzat. Dricus du Plessis, a champion that would have 2 title defenses, Sean Strickland, a former champion, and Alex Pereira. Do I even need to say what his accomplishments are at this rate? And the only other loss that he has ever had as a professional mixed martial artist was back in March of 2021, when he attempted to move up to become a 2-weight world champion, where he would lose to Jan Blachowicz, another former champion. He has only lost to the best of the best in both respective divisions at the time he lost to them, but this one here against Joe Pyfer feels a little bit different. If he were to lose here to be Joe Pyfer, then it would truly feel like he has lost a step, that he is truly falling down the totem pole in this 185-pound division. And that's no disrespect or slight toward Joe Pyfer, but when you look at what he's accomplished compared to the other names that I just talked about, it's not even remotely close. And when you pair this losing skid that Israel Adesanya is on with the fact that he is 36 years old, he is no longer in his prime, but is now closer to the end of his career than the beginning, it seems to be all uphill battles moving forward for Israel Adesanya, as he will enter this main event as a minus 140 favorite on the day I'm recording this over the 14th ranked Joe Pyfer. Even though on paper, in terms of resumes and in terms of accomplishments, Israel Adesanya checks every single box as being the better mixed martial artist. And so of course that betting line has a lot to say about this recent stretch of things for Adesanya, and with his age, and when you really do pair into account that those losses, a majority of them, have come by way of stoppage, there are a lot of potential red flags here on the side of Israel Adesanya, but me heading into this bout, I can't help but favor him in this matchup. Because guys, let us not forget the greatness of Israel Adesanya during his legendary middleweight run, where he would defeat Marvin Vettori once and then do it again a second time with a title defense, defeat Brad Tavares, the second most victories in middleweight history only behind Michael Bisping. He would defeat Derek Brunson, a former perennially top 10 ranked middleweight. He would defeat Anderson the Spider Silva, albeit not in his prime, but the greatest middleweight of all time and one of the best fighters in general. He would have one of the best fights in UFC history and the best fight of 2019 against Kelvin Gastelum. He would go on to defeat Robert Whittaker by knockout and then get a decision win in their second fight. He would beat an Olympic silver medalist in Yoel Romero. He would beat Paulo Costa, at that point the first man to ever beat him, and he did it by way of knockout. He beat Jared Cannonier with a title defense, and of course he had that aforementioned rematch victory over Alex Pereira, one of the greatest fighters and combat sport athletes of all time. And during that middleweight reign of terror that he was on, he would defend the belt successfully 5 times. He would regain the title and he would be an interim champion after that fight with Gastelum. He did all that you can do during the true prime run of his career, and now it's just a matter of discussing if he has any bit of gas left in the tank to hold his spot amongst the elite in this middleweight division, and maybe before it's all said and done, get one more crack at becoming a 3-time champion. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but it will never, ever happen if he tastes defeat here in Seattle against Pyfer. That I can assure you. And for body bags Joe Pyfer, you can absolutely say that this is the biggest opportunity of his career, and it's not even close. And if we're talking competition, this is a massive, massive jump up. Much bigger than going from Abdul Razak Al Hassan to Jack Hermanson. And let us not forget that in that opportunity against Hermanson, it proved to be too much too soon for Pyfer, as he would lose a very convincing decision to Jack. However, that is his lone blemish in his UFC career to date, as he would absolutely come on the scene during the 2022 season of Dana White Contender Series, where Dana White would tout him as the star, telling everyone to be like Joe Pyfer throughout the remainder of that season. And he would absolutely crash into the UFC with 3 straight knockout victories, and that is what would earn him that opportunity against Hermanson. Then he would lose that decision, but since then has won 3 more fights in a row, with 2 of the 3 by way of stoppage. So 5 of his 6 in the UFC by way of finish, with 4 of the 5 by knockout and 1 submission, and that came in his most recent outing where he would defeat Abus Magomedov at UFC 320 last October, which would allow himself to launch into the top 15 of the middleweight division at that number 14 spot. And now out of nowhere, he is getting to take on the legend in Israel Adesanya, who is 10 spots ahead of him in the middleweight division, and it just so happens to come at a very important time for this 185-pound weight class, as just a little over a month after this main event, we will see Khamzat Chimaev defending his title for the first time against the former champion Sean Strickland and former opponent of Adesanya. And because of that title fight being booked, it looks all but certain that we're going to see Dricus du Plessis versus Nasruddin Imavov, which I feel so bad for Imavov in this instance. He should have been the one fighting at UFC 328 against Khamzat, but here we are. We just obviously had Sean Strickland defeat Anthony Hernandez. That is what would get him into that title fight against Chimaev. We saw Caio Borralho defeat Ranier de Ritter. A lot of moving pieces are happening in this middleweight division, and now we see number 4, the former champion Adesanya, and the 14-ranked surging red-hot Joe Pyfer looking to get the biggest win of his career and launch himself directly not only into the top 10, but into the top 5 and amongst the elite title contenders right now at middleweight. This division is on fire right now, and I can't help but be intrigued with everything going on, but this main event specifically is so interesting to me because, like I said a few minutes ago, Adesanya to me is the far better pure mixed martial artist, yet he is just a slight betting favorite, and all of the momentum is on the side of Joe Pyfer, who is the heavy-handed hitter. And when you factor in that we just saw Adesanya get knocked out last year, we saw him get brutally knocked out by Alex Pereira, it's not impossible to think that Joe Pyfer could find the mark here with the right shot on the feet and put Adesanya away by knockout once more. But I wouldn't necessarily compare Joe Pyfer to a Imavov or Alex Pereira when it comes to the striking realm either. Yes, he has power, maybe more one-shot power than both of them. I take that back. Not more than Pereira, but he does have more one-shot power than Imavov. But in terms of pure striking and how he can get the job done and set up his shots, he's still far behind both of them, and Adesanya is one of the greatest strikers and kickboxers in UFC and mixed martial arts history. And from a physicality perspective, yes, Joe Pyfer is very thick and he is strong, but Adesanya is going to be 2 inches taller. He's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage, and I just feel like it's going to be hard for Pyfer to close the distance and get into that dirty boxing realm where he can land a put-away shot. And so, low-key, I'm not going to be surprised if we see Joe Pyfer actually attempt to grapple and wrestle Adesanya in this fight to mix things up and maybe even have his best path to victory, dare I say. Because I would have never expected him to grapple against Abus Magomedov in his last fight in October, and not only did he do that, but he finished him by way of submission on the canvas. That was very impressive, and I think he can definitely bring that little wrinkle into this fight here to throw Adesanya off. And so again, I do still believe in that last style bender, Israel Adesanya. I think that he can have a bounce back performance and hold his spot in the middleweight elite before it's too late. But also, if Joe Pyfer comes in and wins, that is the end of the road for Adesanya if we're talking title aspirations, if we're talking elite discussions present day. Yes, once prior, he was the best fighter in the world, but present day, if he loses here to Joe Pyfer, he will never get back to the pinnacle that he once was. And I could even see him potentially finishing his career with some fun fights at light heavyweight. But that's all Monday morning conversation. We first have to see what will take place in the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle, Washington, and it's time to turn the discussion to you. Will it be Israel Adesanya getting the much-needed bounce-back win, or will it be body bags Joe Pyfer finally putting all of the hype and momentum full circle into fruition and getting the biggest win of his career in what would catapult him up the ranks at 185? Give me your thoughts, your predictions, and your bets for this main event down in the comments below. And now we have to move into the rest of this stacked UFC Seattle Fight Night card, and the first fight to discuss is the co-main event and what I dare say is an equally as pivotal matchup in terms of divisional implications as the main event, and that will be the women's flyweight clash between the former champion and number 3 ranked Alexa Grasso and the absolutely on fire number 5 ranked Maycee Barber, a rematch years in the making. Alexa Grasso moved up to the flyweight division in August of 2020 after a back and forth run of things at 115 pounds, and she would start on fire, winning 4 consecutive bouts in a row, and the second of those 4 came against Maycee Barber, her opponent at UFC Seattle this upcoming weekend, where she would get a unanimous decision 29-28 across the board. From there, Grasso would go on to defeat Joanne Wood and defeat Viviane Araújo in what would set her up for a title shot against Valentina Shevchenko in March of 2023 at UFC 285, and that was the moment where Grasso shocked the world and had the 4th round submission win over the second greatest women's UFC fighter of all time, Valentina Shevchenko, the first of what would become a trilogy for the two, where they will go on to have a draw in their second bout, and then in the third and final bout, Valentina would put a stamp on it in the rivalry and have a dominant decision win. And that loss in the third fight to Valentina for Grasso would come in September of 2024 at Noche UFC, and she has only fought one other time since then, and that came in May of last year, where she would lose a decision to Natalia Silva, the now number 1 contender at flyweight, who I hope is going to be challenging Valentina Shevchenko this summer, fingers crossed. And so much like Israel Adesanya, but actually a little bit longer, Alexa Grasso has not won a fight in over 3 years, dating back to March 4th, 2023, and that victory over Shevchenko. And so she is also looking to hold on to her spot in the elite and title discussion of her women's flyweight division, although unlike Adesanya, she is just 32 years old, so still in those prime years, so things aren't as do or die as they are for Izzy, but still very, very important, as Grasso with a loss here would suffer her 3rd in a row and would be well behind a lot of other women right now in what is the best women's weight class of the 3 in the UFC. Whereas for Maycee Barber, she has not tasted defeat since that loss to Alexa Grasso over 5 years ago now in February of 2021, and has won 7 fights in a row between July of 2021 and December of last year. 6 of those 7 wins have come by way of decision, and she did have a very good knockout win over Amanda Ribas in June of 2023, but since that win against Ribas, things have not been great for Maycee, and not in the cage because she has won 2 straight fights since then, but due to her health, injuries, and illnesses on the outside of the cage that kept her from getting into title contention much sooner. Because after her UFC 299 win against the former title challenger Caitlin Sermonara, she would be on the shelf all the way up until December of 2025, more than a year and a half layoff for Barber, because let us not forget, she was originally slated to fight in May of 2025 against Erin Blanchfield in a title eliminator, a main event in the Apex, but she would quite literally be pulled from the bout as she was about to walk to the octagon. But she put all of that drama and injury and illnesses and storylines behind her, put aside all of the out-of-cage drama, and got the much needed victory in December at UFC 323, where she would get the decision win over Karine Silva. And now here she is looking to win her 8th straight fight, get revenge over Alexa Grasso, the last time that she has lost in her career, and as a result, she will be next in line for a title shot. I don't doubt it for a second. And at 15-2, Maycee Barber on this 7-fight win streak right now is still only 27 years of age, not even in her fighting prime just yet she is now 1 win away from getting a title shot in this women's flyweight division. I still believe in the potential of Maycee. I do still believe that she can be a future champion because she still has years to make evolutions and improvements in her game. And one way to prove that she truly is ready is by getting a win here against Alexa Grasso, someone who has reached the top of the sport once before and is looking to do it a second time if she can bounce back against Barber in Seattle. This fight is more than likely going to take place on the feet, and specifically in the closely contested dirty boxing and clinch ranges, as Alexa is one of the better pure boxers in the women's divisions regardless of weight class, and Maycee Barber from a physicality perspective is insanely strong, loves to get her opponents up against the cage, and when she has them there, she doesn't just hold them there, she rains down big shots and nasty elbows to deliver damage. I think that this is going to be a very good scrap because both women know what is on the line. Grasso needs to hold her spot amongst the elite before she gets sent back down the totem pole, and Maycee Barber needs to put a stamp on this win streak because she's had a couple very, very tightly, closely contested bouts where some people feel that she should have even lost along the way. And so if she can come out here and get a convincing win, dare I say a finish over Alexa Grasso, then she has absolutely arrived as one of the biggest names in all of women's mixed martial arts and is in the driver's seat to take on the winner of Shevchenko versus Silva. We've got the number 9 ranked longtime UFC veteran at this point, Marcin Tybura, taking on the UFC newcomer, but no newcomer to professional MMA, Tyrell Fortune, the longtime Bellator/PFL alum, will be making his debut in Seattle and with a victory can literally immediately insert himself into the heavyweight top 10, which is eerily similar to what Ante D'Elia did for the UFC last September when he debuted in the promotion. Poor Marcin Tybura is getting fed to absolute dogs in their debut. But for what it's worth, before that September loss to D'Elia, Marcin Tybura did have 2 wins against Mick Parkin and a finish win over Gennady Diniz, and of course he has fought some of the best fighters in the heavyweight division over the last decade, including Sergey Spivak, Tai Tuivasa, Tom Aspinall, and Alexander Volkov, but most of those big names he has faltered and lost in those big moments, and that is why he has never been able to crack in to that next upper echelon of the heavyweight division, but has instead been a very, very good gatekeeper, and not in a negative sense, for the top 10 of this weight class. But for Tyrell Fortune, he will enter this fight on a 3-fight win streak with all 3 of them by way of knockout in the first, second, and third round, and his most recent one was actually due to a doctor stoppage when he would defeat Demaro Dennis in September of last year at Lights Out Extreme Fighting. And all in all, the 35-year-old Fortune is 17-3 and has finished 12 of his 17 wins and 11 of those 12 by way of knockout. And so I think this is a much needed addition to the UFC heavyweight division. It's just a matter of if he can deliver on that promise now. And if he can, just like Ante D'Elia did, then he is right in the mix and right in the top 10 of a very, very hindered heavyweight division that needs all the help that it can get right now in 2026. One of my favorite female fighters on the UFC roster, King Casey O'Neill, is back in action for the first time since UFC 305 in August of 2024. She will be taking on Gabriela Fernandez in a big spot in the women's flyweight division, as Casey will be defending her number 12 ranking against the surging Fernandez, who has won her last 3 fights in a row. Fernandez had a rough start to her UFC stretch as she would debut in February of 2023 with a loss to Jasmine Jasdavicius. Of course, that has aged like a fine wine. And then she would lose to Teresa Bleda, but now is on a 3-fight win streak, a decision over Carly Judice, which is a win, mind you, that is also aging very well because Carly looks to be a very legitimate prospect right now at 125. She finished Wang Tong in one of the biggest upsets of all of 2024, and then her most recent fight was a decision win last August where she would beat Julia Storyalenko. And so now the 32-year-old 11-3 Fernandez will look to break into the flyweight top 15 against King Casey O'Neill, who is only 28 years of age, who is just now getting ready to enter her prime, but has been plagued by layoffs and injuries and has really held her back from reaching her potential much quicker, because this is someone who stormed into the UFC with 3 straight finish victories, and at that point would have only been like 24 or 25 years of age, and I was already touting her as a future UFC champion. And while I still believe that she can accomplish that goal, it has just been severely slowed down. So it's good to see her back here in UFC Seattle, and hopefully she can put together a 2 or 3 fight year in 2026 to get herself back on track and trending in the right direction toward title contention and amongst the names of Grasso and Barber. And after Casey would return from her knee injury after tearing her ACL, I believe, in her split decision win over Roxanne Modafferi in February of 2022, she would lose that comeback fight in March of the following year to Jennifer Maia, then lose a second straight fight in December of 23, and that one would come by way of submission to Ariane Da Silva. And so you could tell just how much the bounce back win to Casey meant when she would defeat Luana Santos via decision in August of 2024, but after a full year away in 2025 and a year and a half plus now on the shelf in totality, she is in desperate need of reintroducing herself to the MMA community and to the hardcore fan base, and dare I say with a finish win, even some of the casual audience as well. Don't sleep on King Casey O'Neill. She is one of the hottest prospects in the UFC at one point, and I can believe that she can get that moniker around her name again if she can get a victory at UFC Seattle this Saturday. And lastly, in terms of ranked matchups on this card, 5th and finally, we go to the women's strawweight division as Alexia Tainar, who is number 13 at 115 pounds and one of the best prospects amongst all of the women's weight classes in the UFC right now, will be putting her spot on the line against the veteran Bruna Brazil. Tainara was victorious on the 2024 Dana White Contender Series season, earning a contract into the UFC, and in her debut fight, not only would she be given an opportunity against Molly McCann, one of the biggest names in women's MMA at that point in March of last year, but she would submit her in the very first round in enemy territory in England, and then go on to win her second fight in the UFC via decision in September. And after 2 UFC fights, she's already ranked and now looking to improve to 3-0 and work her way closer to the top 10 if she can beat someone like Brazil, who's had some pretty good competition in her UFC career so far. And Alexia, teammate of Amanda Hebos, is 13-1 and is only 28 years old and just now getting ready to enter her prime. And of her 13 wins, 8 of them have come by way of submission. She is a jiu-jitsu ace when it gets down to the canvas, but she's also sneakily good on the feet as well. A very well-rounded mixed martial artist and a fun addition to this strawweight division. For Bruna Brazil, she has had 7 UFC fights so far and has quite literally traded wins and losses since debuting in April of 2023 after getting a head kick knockout on the 2022 season of DWCS. She would actually be knocked out in her debut to Denise Gomes, but then would bounce back with a victory over Shauna Bannon. Then she would lose a decision. Then she would beat Molly McCann. Then she would lose to Wong Tong. Then she would get a decision win. And then in her most recent fight, she would lose a decision. And it was literally a month and a half ago in February to Ketlin Souza. And so if you follow the trend of her career, she is on pace to get a victory here on Saturday against Alexia Tainara and insert herself into the top 15 of the women's strawweight division. But that is easier said than done. So that's all 5 of the ranked matchups, but I am damn sure not done yet. There are some other big time fun scraps on this card. Quite literally, I could talk about all 13 of them, to be honest with you. This is going to be a great fight night. But at the top of the board of storylines for the remainder of the card is Michael Chiesa, who will be calling it a career this upcoming Saturday in his home state of Washington, and he will be taking on fellow longtime veteran Nico Price in a fight that is sure to deliver. The 38-year-old Maverick Michael Chiesa is actually riding a 3-fight win streak heading into UFC Seattle with 2 of the 3 by way of submission over Max Griffin and Tony Ferguson, and his most recent fight was in June of last year where he would get a decision win over Court McGee. And so if he can finish his career on top with 4 straight wins, that is something that not a lot of people get to say, and especially if he can do it in front of his home crowd, that is going to be a truly special moment for one of the best fighter turned commentators that I've seen so far in the UFC. But it's complete polar opposite for Nico Price as he enters UFC Seattle having lost 5 of his last 6 bouts, including 3 straight, with his last 2 by way of finish, and his most recent win was a month and a half ago on February 7th, where he would get knocked out by Nikolay Veretinnikov, and he's taking this fight on short notice against Chiesa, so it is a massive uphill battle in enemy territory. Michael Chiesa, all the momentum behind him, looking to go out on top in his retirement bout. This is going to be a dangerous fight for Nico Price, but oh my gosh, if he wins, this place is going to be pissed. Mansur Abdul Malik, the best prospect in the middleweight division and one of the best in all of the UFC, is back at UFC Seattle, and he is taking on Yusri Belgaro, and the 28-year-old Abdul Malik is 9-0 with a draw in his career and has finished all 9 of his professional wins with 7 knockouts and 2 submissions, and he is 3-0-1 in the UFC. He did have a draw against Cody Brundage, but that is because it would be overturned due to some accidental shit that would happen in that fight, because he actually finished Brundage 36 seconds into the 3rd round. And his most recent fight came in December of last year where he would submit Antonio Tricoli, who just fought on last week's UFC London card, and if he gets a win this weekend, he should absolutely be fighting a ranked middleweight next after 5 UFC bouts and 5 victories essentially. But I will say that this one may come with a little bit of adversity, at least a little bit more than what Mansur is used to, because Yusri is 9-3, has 7 knockouts in his own right, is a Netherlands kickboxer from Amsterdam, and sits at 6'5", or should I say he stands at 6'5". You get the point. He got a knockout on the 2024 season of Dana White Contender Series and then debuted in October of last year and got a 3rd round knockout over Azamat Bikoev, and all in all has won his last 4 fights with 3 of the 4 by way of knockout. This one has banger potential written all over it in my opinion. Don't sleep on this fight, and if you haven't heard of Mansur Abdul Malik already, then you better be paying attention on Saturday night. And Yusri may be able to play big time spoiler. Terrence McKinney, the most exciting first round fighter in UFC history, is taking taking on the Canadian veteran Kyle Nelson. That one's likely going to end in stoppage and likely in the first period. Ignacio Bahamondes is taking on Tofik Musayev in the lightweight division. That fight is probably going to get slept on, but it is a very, very intriguing scrap between two guys looking to crack into the top 15. Chase Hooper's back, and lightweight Chase Hooper at that, taking on Lance Gibson Jr., who just debuted in the UFC last year and would lose his debut on short notice to Bobby Green via split decision. The undefeated light heavyweight prospect Navajo Sterling is taking on Bruno Lopez. That's going to be a fun fight, as Navajo is yet to have that really convincing, emphatic performance, and so maybe it can happen on Saturday night. And one of my favorite fighters, Ricky Simone, is back, taking on Adrian Yanez in the second fight of the night. Are you kidding me? Those two guys are right on the outside looking in of the 135-pound rankings. This card, from top to bottom, is absolutely loaded with fun fights, with ranked matchups and everything in between, and it is hands down, bar none, the best fight night card so far throughout the first 3 months of 2026. But that's it for me, and now we turn it over to you. Give me all of your thoughts, your predictions, your breakdowns, your bets, and everything in between for UFC Seattle down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, as every single week I break down the biggest and best fights heading into each card. I recap the most meaningful results in the aftermath, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcement. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platform. Every Monday and Friday podcast episodes released there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will see you all in the next video.